Hey, welcome to the Art Condition Podcast, a weekly show that will discuss the business, community, and often undiscussed stress and mental health concerns of being a professional artist, or even a serious hobbyist. I'm Joby. I've been in the tattoo and illustration professions for 25 years. My co-host is Moose, a data analyst, social media manager, and art agent. If you enjoy the content, please consider visiting the Patreon page in the show notes to help support the effort. Or if that's not an option, please like, subscribe, leave a good review, or just share with your friends. And definitely go visit the links of our guests on this episode. Thanks for listening, and have a great day. This week we are talking to David Peterson. David is the creator and artist for the comic Mouse Gaurd. If you're a fan of comics and not already familiar with Mouse Gaurd, do yourself a favor and get acquainted with this extraordinary world. David is a master storyteller, and the art is soulful and iconic. We start off discussing David's approach to world building and how to tackle the enormous task of creating an immersive experience for your viewers and readers without becoming overwhelmed and bogged down. Spoiler, it's a lot like any other piece of art. Start with the big shapes and gradually add smaller details only where you need them. We then talk a bit about how to produce, market, and distribute an intellectual property while keeping it safe from exploitation. We also delve into a good bit of the origins and development of the world of Mouse Gaurd. David is also the host of his own online convention, aptly called Onlinecon. The event is full of great interviews and amazing art. As of this recording, online is over, but there will be more in the future, and our discussion of the event is worth listening to, as are the recordings of the past events, which can be found on David's Twitch channel, linked in the show notes. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy our talk with David Peterson. So excited, David. Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. When we started doing, if you'll allow me a tiny bit of fanboying, when we started,
of course,
when we started this podcast, you were one of the first names that went down on our list of hopefuls to interview in the future. So the fact that we've reached this landmark is fantastic. I feel like we're doing something right. And so welcome, and thank you for giving us your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, let's dive right into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, David. What's your background, and how did you get snagged by the art hook and reeled in for life?
I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and my dad worked in the automotive industry. He was kind of on the engineering side. My mom was a stay-at-home homemaker who had a nursing background. Both were fairly creative. My mom did a lot of crafting style artwork. She did needlepoint. She made clothes. She also did other kind of decorative crafts with hot melt glue and wreaths and household decorations and holiday decoration kind of stuff. And my dad was a woodworker, and he did a little bit of metal sculpture. So creativity was encouraged. My sisters were both in theater and choir. It was a creative household, even though engineering background and automotive town was the setting. Getting hooked in art. I mean, every kid draws, right? You ask any group of kindergartners, how many of you like to draw? Boom, all the hands go up. And the higher you go up in grades, every time you ask that question, the fewer hands actually stay up until you get to some point like in 6th or 7th grade where it's only the art nerds that are putting up their hands. Yeah. And I was just one of those kids who never put down my hand. Even though there was a weird discouraging time towards my probably the end of elementary school where I didn't think of myself as the art guy. I liked art, but I wasn't the art guy. And I think it's because of like weird kid identification thing. Like that's the smart kid. That's the athletic kid. That's the kid who does karate. And whatever, right? Like that. She's the roller skater. He plays hockey. Whatever. And there already was the art kid, the kid who was really good at drawing in my elementary class, and it wasn't me. So I was just more like the troublemaker, not serious trouble, but like, somewhere between class clown and troublemaker. I was a Weasley twin. I was half of the Weasley twins.
Okay.
Yeah, but art. Yeah, I think it was then getting into middle school, and I think around that time also my parents were cool with paying for some extracurricular art classes that were serious. They actually had done some of that when I was younger too, but I feel like in some ways those were more like babysitting style activities. Like, it'd be great to get David interested in something after school once a week or twice a week, and he likes art, so that's fine. But then middle school, I think I started going to the Flint Institute of Arts for some of their educational workshops and classes and things. And like those were the kinds where they came with supply lists. You had to go get the stuff that you needed for that class. And my parents were totally cool with that. So I think that's when I got hooked. That's when it became serious.
Did that formal education continue into like a proper art school, or have you been mostly self-guided since then?
I think it's actually a good mix of both. I took art from so in elementary school. I was one of those last generations where art and music were offered year round, as like part of class. It was normal, and then from 7th through 12th grade, where art's an elective, I had it almost the entire time. There was part of 7th grade that I didn't, but from 8th to 12th, I had art as an elective every semester, and some of that was more formal, and some of it was almost like, here's an hour of free time, because the teacher was so hands off. Like, here's an hour of free time to just do art, draw, whatever you want. Very little structure, very little education part of it. And I continued to take the classes at Flint Institute of Arts. And then I went to Mott Community College to start, which had a great arts program. There was actually a really cool program for juniors and seniors at all the high schools in the county to come to the Flint Institute of Arts it was called the Welsh Young Fine Artist Program. But it was basically like, hey, as high school seniors and juniors, if you want to take college level classes as a sampler, that's what we're going to offer. And you had to like send in a portfolio to get accepted. I did that, and I ended up meeting a lot of the Mott Community College professors that way, and liked it. We were in their facilities, and I went, okay, cool. So when I graduate, I'm gonna transfer, or I'm gonna enroll in Mott Community College. So I did 2 years there. And then I transferred to a university. I wanted to get a degree because I knew that art wasn't necessarily going to pay the bills. But I still got my degree in art. I got a bachelor's in fine arts in printmaking. But I knew even just having, he has a college degree, I can check that box on forms. I can write that down on my CV. It meant that I could go further than some other applicants just for having done it. And then formal, I finished out at Eastern Michigan. But Eastern was very very fine art centric, at least when I was there. I don't want to besmirch their current reputation. I have no idea what they're like now, but at the time they were so fine art centric that they were the kind of art department that looked down their nose at illustration. That was a craft. That was a lesser form of art. They didn't deal with that kind of thing. In fact, even if you were doing something where you weren't actively working on a still life, if you drew representationally, I had professors coming down on me for drawing representational or even realistically, because they were like, we have a camera. We don't need you to recreate the real world. Like put love on the page, put hate on the page, put emotion, And I was like, I also want to be able to be competent at what I'm doing. Yeah.
Sorry, that wasn't a cutoff.
So I just, I'm sorry. So I had to yeah, I know you were giving my professor some guff. So what that meant was I had to do a lot of relearning and self-teaching in between semesters just on my own, but also once I graduated, I had to teach myself how to be an illustrator because I left with a degree that I had zero illustration experience.
That's so bizarre, that mentality. I don't want to go off on that tangent too much, but that's so weird. It's so. I mean, that's for another time. I'll.
Yeah, I mean, the really quick positive. So there's obviously positive and negatives. I think we can all see the negatives. The positive of it is I think that any life experience is going to inform you both as a person, but also as an artist. And those could be interpersonal issues. Those could be specific art things. But it meant that I was exposed to types of art, styles of art, maybe even materials that I wouldn't normally have. I was pushed out of my comfort zone in lots of ways there. It also meant that there was some things where it was like, it's kind of like doing client work sometimes. You are being told this is what you have to do. And it's not what I want to do or would normally do under any circumstances. But how can I do that, but not betray myself as an artist? How can I do my best version of whatever that is? And while, yes, I would have preferred having some of the other experience, there was something that came out of the doing the type of artwork that I had zero interest in, being forced to do that.
That's fair. I always immediately jump right to the negative and get so frustrated. It's like, I'd forget, okay, maybe there are some positives to that. So coming out of school, with the degree in fine arts, but no intent necessarily to go right into a artistic profession, whatever that might be. What line of work did you go into, if I may ask? And then how did you find your way into making art the life and career path?
Yeah. So I wanted to make art the career path and the financial stability. I just was realistic to know that wasn't going to happen, especially for someone who wanted to try to get a job doing, some type of illustration. And I just left where I have zero experience illustrating. And I don't even really have a portfolio of decent illustration work. So in terms of just paying the bills, I just kind of kept up with the college style jobs. In college, I worked at an ice cream store. I worked at a movie theater briefly. I worked at a Starbucks was kind of the longest haul. I was a barista at Starbucks. And I remember it being a very sad day, the first shift that I had to work at Starbucks after my commencement ceremony from college, and being like, there, I got my degree. And I'm right back doing the same damn thing I was doing when I was a student. And nothing against Starbucks. There are days where I still miss being a barista. But I did that. And then I went into, there was a really cool architectural antique store in town in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where Eastern is. And I was just browsing this shop. It was a really cool place. They had all these, salvaged mantles and armoires and light fixtures and stained glass. And I was like, this is cool. And just to look around. And then I saw they had a sign up saying they were looking for some extra help. So that was the kind of job where I could do it and still have time and creative energies when I wasn't at work to try to build that portfolio and build my work. I was not disciplined or driven or had any kind of a plan for how the art was going to become the path. It was almost this like, I just have to wait. There's going to be this right moment. I'll know it when I see it, almost sort of like waiting for the entrance ramp. And it was definitely a lazy path of not, it was lazy, but it was also just, I didn't know any better. I didn't know any better. But I'll say that with every one of those jobs, I found a way to do art for the job. So when I was at Starbucks, we had those chalk signs that go up next to the menu board that would advertise whatever the special was. And depending on who was the shift supervisor, they'd try to find somebody who had like nice cursive to write like Frappuccinos, only $3 or whatever. And they'd try their best to like draw a cup with a straw or something. And I was like, well, I could do a really cool, like, how about I draw like a cat drinking a Frappuccino? And they're like, what? So I did that. And I did it. I brought in my chalk pastels from school. Like I wasn't using just the chalk set that came with the sign. And so I did these like full on pastel drawings on a sign. And then they were like, okay, so we want you to do the signs every month, every week. And that got to the point where they were actually bringing me in on hours where I wasn't scheduled to work. Because it took a long enough time. They couldn't justify me being off, like out in the cafe drawing when the line was backed up when I was supposed to be working. And then same kind of thing for the antique store. I started by redesigning a brochure. And then I was like, well, now the business cards are all out of date. Well, we should also do a postcard for an upcoming sale. Hey, the website really needs some work. It's a 15,000 square foot store. People don't know where they're going when they come in. We need more signage. We need signs advertising what we do. Hey, I noticed we keep saying this line over and over and over again about our lighting or about our furniture or about our delivery policy. I should make graphics that explain all of that. And we can hang them up around the store. And so I just turned it into like this. I was hired as a salesman. I was a terrible salesman. But I ended up carving out this like graphic design, web design, advertising kind of gig out of it.
Yeah, it's like early business education, sort of like your early introduction to marketing and and business, creative marketing and business. So was it just
most of what I learned about print files came from having to get postcards printed and brochures printed and business cards printed and all that kind of stuff that we were printing for the antique store, and dealing with local printers there is how I learned everything about Photoshop files and PDFs and all that. I didn't have any of that in school.
There you go. Real world experience. There's a lesson in that. Take notes, everybody. Was it odd? Was it kind of the semi-related odd jobs until Mouse Gaurd, or was there?
Yeah.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I wrote and drew the entire first book of Mouse Gaurd fall while I was still working the antique job. I did it on nights and weekends. I had a 1 hour commute to that store, and when I started the job, I was just down the block. But then when Julia and I got married, we moved, and that's when I started working on Mouse Gaurd. And yeah, I would call. This is in the days before smartphones. I would call our house knowing nobody was home because Julia was already at work, or still at work if I was on my way home. I would call the house and I would leave myself messages, because in those drives I would be coming up with story ideas or dialogue snippets, and there just wasn't an easy way to record myself or to write anything down or dictate to a phone or something like that. So I just call and leave myself voicemail messages here at the house. And then nights and weekends writing and drawing Mouse Gaurd. And even when it took off and it was kind of a success, there was a part of me that was like, okay, it's time to quit the day job. But Julia and I are both level-headed enough to realize this could be a fluke. This could be a flash in the pan. You have health benefits. You have, stability. Let's wait until we know this is real. And it was when the pre-order numbers for the hardcover, the first collection came in, that we went, oh, okay. It would actually hinder me being able to pursue this if I don't quit the job now.
That is pretty awesome, though.
So, real quick, with our audience, we try to like give them information of like before they start doing something, they should consider this, plan this out, know that this is how much money they're going to make and stuff like that. Did you have any planning before Mouse Guard, or what was it that drove you to try this?
So I self-published the first issue of Mouse Guard, but I did that. My understanding of the numbers came out of there was an art history professor that I knew when I was still a student who was putting on a gallery show at the university. He was actually one of the people who wanted to get illustration and comic art respected within that art department. And so he put on a gallery show of comic book art. And he got an amazing collection of golden age to modern age original art pages, hung everything from giant Prince Valiant pages to modern DC stuff. It was an incredible show, but instead of having like a catalog of the works in the show, he wanted to print a comic for everyone to take home. So he contacted all the people that he knew from the school who had been students or former students to write and draw some kind of a short story, and he'd put it together like an anthology. And I worked with him on that and found out about print on demand, which was just burgeoning at that time. It was a brand new thing. So I learned about the finances of how much it costs through that experience, how much it would cost to self-publish a print-on-demand comic. And it was, and there was a website where you could also, put in all your numbers. If I want this many pages, or if I want a color cover, they had some other options that could bump or lower your price. And I knew that, and I knew how much a table at a convention costs, because I had a friend, Jeremy Bastian, who, of course, Pirate Girl fame, who had been going to the local convention for a long time. He's the first one who said, "Hey, you should come to the Motor City Comic Con. You should set up." And I was like, "Well, I don't have a comic." At the time, I said, "Well, I don't have a comic." And he goes, "Well, I don't have a comic, and I've been setting up for the last 4 years." I was like, "Oh, okay." So he broke down like table fees and that kind of thing with me. And I just went in thinking like, look, I was going to be paying to get into the convention as an attendee that weekend anyways. If I spend this much more on a table, I have a place to sit, and if I go buy anything, I have a place to stash it. Plus, I'm going to be putting out my work, and maybe people will commission me, and I can make some money back. So I did that once with no book. And then Mouse Guard was, that convention ran twice a year. So it was like 6 months later that I had Mouse Guard there. So I knew I already had one convention under my belt to know the table fees and kind of the return. I knew how much print-on-demand self-published issues were going to cost. And my goal was to, I had several tiers of goals. Lowest tier goal was make back everything so that I was at even, because I was going to spend that weekend at the Motor City Comic Con anyways. So if I didn't have to pay to get in, awesome. If I made enough profit to preemptively pay for issue 2's printing bill, we're already making issue 2. So those were like, I had very manageable early goals.
There's some awesome, it's like moments of fortune that like this idea of going to conventions without a book, like doing comic conventions without having a published comic book, but then that sort of serving as this launch pad to then when you did have a book, okay, well now I know everything about about conventions. I don't have to learn all of that stuff within reason. I know enough to not be just trying to like learn everything on the fly while I'm also trying to like be doing all of the things, promoting this book and talking to people about it and all that stuff. So that's kind of awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot to learn about convention. I basically knew how to fill out the paperwork to get a table, how much it costs, and where the loading doors were. That's about all I really knew about conventions.
Enough to get started.
Yeah, that's true. And also, this was back in 2004, 2005. And the fee for a table at that time was you could buy a half table for $50 or a full table for $100. So the idea of like starting out, going to a convention with nothing other than hopes of maybe getting some commissions and, you know, throwing out a few original pieces and going, I don't know, if you buy them, cool. Very different price structure than where we are right now. So, yeah, I've been very lucky. There, you're right that there was some like good fortune, magical moments happening, but it was also in an era where the finances worked that way.
I think that leads into this question rather nicely. A little weird, a little long-winded, but let's go through it. All right. So imagine that you are Peter Davidson. You have the same skills and abilities of David Peterson, but he is somebody else. David is still working on Mouse Gaurd and hosting Onlinecon, and you can only watch. You're not part of that community. You have to start your career from scratch today. You don't know anybody in the industry, and you don't have your connections or anything like that. What do you do to start? Do you start a new world building project, or is there something else that seems like a more reasonable approach to having to start your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, the weirdness of this question is you're asking me to be with me without being me. To make it broad and vague for everybody, I would say, you know, the idea of like playing to your strengths. You play to some kind of thing that is your strength. So for me, in some ways, that is like a world building thing. It'd be some kind of storytelling thing that I'd definitely be building a world within it because that's who I am. And yeah, I would just start something new. I think the things that I would do differently because of the age that we're living in, like how things are different, is I would be trying to build up a community virtually. I would be trying to reach out and make friends with people on Twitch who are in the industry. I'd be, and that's not necessarily even like, it's not like a rung climbing kind of thing. It's not like, ooh, I need to be friends with, you know, I need to be friends with the real David Peterson because he can make or break my career. Not that at all. And any kind of artist that you feel a kinship with, that you're liking the work of, or even if it's not even about the work, just like, hey, I like the work ethic, or I like the way that they run their stream on Twitch or whatever, or their website. I mean, it doesn't have to be a Twitch thing. I think there's a great community thing there because you can have a live dialogue. But yeah, whether it's Instagram or whatever, I would be focused on, I'd probably take a similar path, just it's a little different because the technology has changed. But, you know, I didn't like do research into what would be a good comic. I had some drawings of Mouse Gaurd stuff at that first convention of those concepts. People said, when does this book come out? After getting the question a couple times, I went, I'll have the book for the next convention. But, you know, I had all of 5 people show interest. So I would just put something out there. I'd make a comic on my own or a whatever. If I wasn't me, you know, whatever it is I'm interested in, I would make that thing. I would make a finished product to the best of my ability for my skill level at that moment. I'd make a thing. I'd make it available. I'd start making friends in a community virtually. And just sharing my work. I think if you share good work and you're a decent person and you know, not a slog to be around, not someone who makes it feel like every interaction is transactional. Yeah, you're going to find some level of success because you're going to find a group of people who like your work, and you're going to find a group of people who like you. And then that Venn diagram, you know, that middle spot is going to be potentially interested in supporting you financially, but also interested in spreading the gospel of you.
So what about the world building aspect? How much of that do you do just front load it versus making the product to, you know, survive?
I don't do as much world building, I think, as people think. I'm dead set against over front loading for 2 reasons. One, it can bog you down as a creator. I remember a good friend of mine, my friend Jesse Glenn, who's also the co-host with me on my video podcast series, The Plotmasters Project. He and I grew up together role playing and creating comic characters and world building stuff together. And I remember there was a D&D campaign that he was planning for, and he was just filling up a binder with history about that kingdom and this character, and it went back generations of how many generations back the kingdom went, and there was a war 500 years ago, and this is the fallout, and here's the map as it was before the war, and here's how it was after, and here's how it is currently. And it's like, are we ever going to get to play this game? Like, when are we actually going to start the story? Because the story is what's happening when we play. And it just got so overwhelming. He was kind of like, yeah, I don't even know where to start. This is too much. And then if you're feeling that way as a creator, even if you're not feeling that way as a creator, even if you feel good because you've got it all straight in your head, you've had years to mentally organize that in your head of what this world is like. You have it all straightened out. But your readership doesn't. Your viewership doesn't. Whoever your fans are don't know anything about it. And if you just dump something on them, like, here's all the history, here's the map, here's the various maps, here are all the wars, here's the timeline, here's the chronology of kings and queens, and it's too much. It's like having them read a history book. And I know some people like reading history books, but for the most part, when somebody's wanting to watch something to be entertained, they want a story, they want characters they connect to. So that stuff has to be revealed slowly over time. The analogy I like to use for young creators about this is your story, when it's really going well, is running at freeway speeds. But your audience is just backing out of the driveway. You need to give them some surface streets and an entrance ramp to go with you to get up to speed. You cannot expect them to back out of their driveway and already be going 75 miles an hour. You got to give them some lead up. So you got to slowly build that world stuff. So if you have an idea of where things are going, but don't have it all planned out, I think that's better. I'm a big fan of like planting story seeds, even for yourself. You don't necessarily have it all written down. You just stake out a few little bits. And the next time you need to make a new story, or when you're going to do a new chapter, go, I could explain more of that. I planted that thing a little while ago. I wonder what that's even about. I should make something up for that. That'd be cool.
What you just said reminds me of the opening of Skyrim, when they're in the wagon and they just give the big exposition dump. Like, I'm from Isengard. My cousin, he's from Ravenhelt, and the people are just playing the game like, I thought I was going to slay dragons.
Yeah. I remember reading comics where they'd start doing that. And I'd think, am I supposed to be writing this down? Do I need a cheat sheet? Like, actively, so I don't have to keep flipping back to this page to get all the details.
It reminds me of reading Song of I'm totally blanking
Song of
on
Ice
the
and
name.
Fire?
Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah. And R.R. Martin has that tendency. So where do you start? How do you like to start laying the groundwork and building onto it?
I think vague characters in the feeling of a world. So with Mouse Gaurd, it's about like the world building stuff that was already in place before I started issue 1, were things like, well, they're mice, and they're mice at mouse size. And the whole idea is it's about being very small in a world that's very big. So they're mice, they're mouse sized. The other animals are going to be their appropriate sizes. I don't really want to deal with all the other kingdoms and civilizations of like squirrel, things similar in size to a mouse, like that wouldn't necessarily be predatory. Squirrels and chipmunks and voles and things like that. So we're just not going to have them. We're going to say that there's an area of space. It's called the mouse territories. That's where the mice are. And then the predators need to act like predators, and not all animals understand each other's language. And there's a group called the Mouse Gaurd, and there's a central base that's called Lockhaven. And it's always run by a matriarch. The current one is Gwendolyn. That's it. I don't think I had any previous matriarchs written down. I didn't have the names of cities written down. I had no idea how big or small the mouse territories were. I had some vague stuff about like, oh, there's this big war that's happened, but I don't want to tell that story because that's a bigger story than I'm capable of handling as my first story, and probably bigger than what my audience is willing to swallow as the first story. So I'm just going to say that there was this big war with some weasels, and we'll just use that as a backdrop. I don't know what happened there, but we'll figure it out at some point. I have a video on YouTube. I do creator commentary for my books, and each chapter gets its own video. In the first chapter of the first book, the creator commentary obviously gets front loaded with a lot of like, where did Mouse Gaurd come from? And that also has to do with the self-published, and then how it got from being self-published to Archaea and etc. But I also think that one has a lot of really good moments where I'm trying to explain how that first issue had to be that entrance ramp. And I think I go in a little more detail there about how little the things that I definitely knew in concrete of this is this character, or I always want the mice to go out on patrol together, or whatever. And then here's all the stuff I had no clue about. I was making it up.
So it's going with the analogy of with the seeds and planting seeds of little story ideas. With that analogy, I almost kind of see it as you're outlining the borders of your fertile field, and so this is
with a dotted line though.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
So that I can in between those dots go, well, there's this one little bit that goes out right here because I
like that.
But yeah.
So then, as you're going, are there major like pitfalls along the way that you, again, going back to now you're Peter Davidson? Are there major pitfalls? Are there holes in the field that you know are going to be there, and you're like, okay, I have to skirt around these? Am I making this analogy too weird, or are you following?
It's also weird because there is somebody named Peter Davidson who was, of course, he was one of the actors who played the Doctor in Doctor Who. So you're also asking me to be a Time Lord, which means that most of these questions are meaningless, because if I'm a Time Lord, I can just go forward or backward anywhere I want to go and talk to the real David Peterson. And pick his brain, my brain. Wait, what? But yeah, the pitfalls. There's always the paint yourself into a corner kind of a problem, and I think that's going to happen no matter what. Like at some point, you need to write a story or do something that's going to build off of what you've already got. No story comes completely formed in your mind. At some point, you're going to have to be adding on, which means you're going to have to make that completely dovetail into what you already have that exists. And that might paint you into a corner. It might force your hand. I have to go this direction because I've already established it in the previous stuff. So it might happen. That might happen a little more frequently when you're going that slow, when you're building the bridge as you're crossing the river. It might happen a little bit more frequently, but I like it. I think it works better for me actually than front loading. I lose energy if I've written it all, and then I'm like, oh man, now I gotta draw all this. I already came up with a story. The story's done, but if I'm coming up with it kind of as I'm going and working from broader outlines, I feel like that's a better process. I felt like I had something else there, but go ahead.
That reminds me of people when they show off their sketch and they get a lot of positive feedback from the sketch, and they're like, all right, well, I don't really feel like finishing it now because I already got that positive feedback I was looking for.
Yeah.
There's actually a neurological process that supports this above and beyond just personal preference. Which is that your brain can't distinguish between something that you've talked about in very excited, animated ways to the point where actually thinks that it's already happened. It can't differentiate between those things and things that you've actually already done. So if you do a lot of, all of that front loading, you can actually do exactly what you said, where you okay, I've done it all. You lose all of the energy for anything that would come after that, because in your brain, like, you've already done it, and your brain doesn't want to go and do the exact same thing all over again. So
yeah,
it's like losing save progress on a game. You're like, man, I forgot to save for 2 hours, and now I have to go back and do the same thing again. I don't want to. Absolutely.
I've had a couple times where a word processor document crashed, and I realized I didn't save anything. And there was never a ton of work, but it was always enough where it was like, I'm never going to get it back to. Not only do I have to do the same thing again, but I'm never going to get it back to as well worded as I had it the last time. Even if, truth be told, it probably wasn't that well worded. I'm just, that you're never going to get it quite as good as you had it the first time. And in some ways, you probably make it better, but in your head, it's that thing of like, I'm just repaving the same road, and it's not going to be as good as the first one.
Are there any story bifurcations that you can look back on, like that you didn't take, that you recall as like, oh man, I wish that I could have done X instead of Y, but I painted myself into the Y corner, so I had to do that?
The only one of those that's really so I rely on things like there's potential with unreliable narrators in the past, or there are ways around some of those things. If you're like, well, I also want to say that this character did this other thing, like, well, did you explicitly say that this character didn't do that? Because if not, you can say, hey, guess what? In the middle of the night, they went off and did this. They did the thing I want them to do, and the reader never got to see it. Those are the places where I feel like, even if there's a like, ooh, I wish I'd gone that way, I still have room to maneuver. The only one that really has ever come up was I did a spin-off anthology called Legends of the Guard, where I had guest artists come in and tell the tall tales and legends set in the Mouse Gaurd world. And I gave the creators who did those stories complete free reign. Go ahead, do whatever you want. These are supposed to be like the Paul Bunyan, Babe Blue Ox kind of stories for the mice. They can be morality tales. They can just be nursery rhymes, whatever you want. You do something fun. And at the point that we were doing this, the Mouse Gaurd role-playing game had already come out. And for the Mouse Gaurd role-playing game, Luke had asked me to write kind of like a brief history of the Mouse Gaurd, how the Mouse Gaurd was formed, how the origin of their citadel called Lockhaven was formed, that kind of thing. So I already established that. And then Jeremy Bastian comes in and draws a story that is kind of his tall tale version of the first two guard mice and the first matriarch, and the symbology of the cloaks and their relationship with the wider realm of other animals and beasts. And it was so good, I was mad at him that I didn't come up with it. And I really wish it could be the origin.
Mm-hmm.
But I've already established the other one. So I'm trying to find ways to fold it in. I have, like, in the third book, there's a part where a mouse goes into a chamber that's it's kind of like a sanctum, a place of honor for all the past matriarchs, and some of the most notable ones are established in stained glass. And that first matriarch from Jeremy's story is actually the front and center, like right behind the altar, as it were. Stained glass portrait of a past matriarch. So I have incorporated that she was a matriarch at some point. So how much of Jeremy's story is true? How much of it is untrue? I'm trying to balance a way to fold that in without completely contradicting myself.
You can steal one of the universe things from Marvel, I guess.
Parallel dimension, multiverses.
Yeah, this is universe 416 Mouse Gaurd. 417 Mouse Gaurd was his version.
That's dangerous, though. That's dangerous.
Yeah, talk about not front loading too much.
Yeah. Don't just come up with one universe. Come up with all of them.
But speaking of origins, for you personally as the creator, what were some of the early origins of Mouse Guard? What started planting that seed for you and giving you those ideas?
In high school, I love talking animal stories, and I was always better at drawing creatures and animals than I was humans. And in high school, some friends and I were kind of writing and drawing our own comics, or at least trying to. And there were three, kind of a core group of three of us who wrote and drew, and we were kind of like our own little mini comic company. One guy was working on a comic that took place in modern times, and the next guy was working on something that was going to be like sci-fi. And I was like, well, that means I have to do something set in the past. I like Disney's Robin Hood. I'm going to do something that's like medieval animals. And it was called 1149, which is the year that it was set. And it was very much Disney's Robin Hood. I mean, there was a bear, there was a fox, but there was also a ferret and a possum and a duck. And it was kind of like a D&D party, but made out of talking animals that looked more like Disney's versions. They were all human-sized, with the shortest character being like the equivalent of a very short human, and the tallest being the equivalent of maybe the tallest NBA player. And that was high school. And of course, because it's high school, we never really got anything done. But in college, I wanted to dust the idea off again. And I thought, I want to make this more serious. I don't want to make this so cartoony. I don't want this to be Disney's Robin Hood. I want this to be like Aesop's Fables meets Tolkien. So I'm going to treat every species like Tolkien would treat a race. It's going to have its own architecture style. It's going to have its own language. It's going to have its own history and customs. And I'm going to do that with every one of them. It's not just the world of elves, men, dwarves, and halflings. It's the world of geese and warthogs and ferrets and tigers and, wolves and foxes and etc. And I was like, wow, that's going to be a lot of work, but it sounds fun. What's the biggest? I should put some parameters here. What's the biggest animal that I deal with, and what's the smallest? Well, biggest would be something like a grizzly bear. I don't want to go into extinct dinosaur kind of things or anything like that. So I think like a grizzly bear would probably be the biggest. And then the smallest would be like a mouse, because I don't want to go into the world of the insects. I think that's going too crazy. So that's going to be my range. And I'm like, wow, how do you keep smaller creatures involved in a story where they play an active role? If all the other larger creatures are predators, like two predators that are both predatory animals, a fox and a wolf, you can kind of figure that there's some kind of way that they're each defending themselves so that they're not in danger from the other one killing them. But when you've got like a wolf and a mouse, it's going to take a lot of story crafting to make sure that wolf never wants to eat that mouse. You always have to come up with some kind of caveat of like, well, the mouse has information or has something that the wolf needs or whatever. And it's like, that's going to be way too hard to do for an entire story with more than one character and multiple species. So how do you keep these smaller things alive? And I was like, well, I'll come up with a society for mice. I started working on their society. Like, how do they protect themselves? And how do they get around from one location to another without being attacked? And I came up with this idea of these group of rangers, these mouse rangers called the Mouse Guard. And as I worked on it, I'm like, this is really the story. This is the interesting part. So I should just focus on the mice and make it the perspective of the mouse. And everything else kind of gets just pushed into the background as predators or other things. And then I during that time, a friend of mine handed me the first book in the Redwall series, which is a young adult series written by Brian Jakes about medieval mice, but also hares and badgers and some other things. And I read that first one. It was really good. I enjoyed it. And I went, oh, damn, someone's already doing this. So I didn't do anything with Mouse Guard for a while. I mean, granted, I was a college student. I had lots of other things going on, both college and then personally with friends and dating and all sorts of stuff like that. So, but it was a total of about 9 years between when I first drew the very first characters for Mouse Guard, when 1149 became Mouse Guard, the first Mouse Guard characters, and about 9 years between then and when I started actually drawing issue 1 of Mouse Guard. So in that time, I had also, like I said, graduated from college, gotten married, settled down, had some stability, and thought maybe I could do this.
So based on some of the
that was
things
a long answer. I'm sorry.
Oh no, don't worry. Never apologize for long-winded answers. The lead up to public consumption now. You based on some of the things that you've said before, I can maybe anticipate the answer here, but leading up to Mouse Guard going live, so to speak, was there a lot of learning and planning that you did to begin with, or did you just kind of just start producing and learn as you went?
I mean, it's probably more in the start producing category. I never had any like formal sit down and study how to write and draw comics, but I also wasn't going in cold. I had been reading comics since I was 11. I was also very easily critical of comics that were done well and comics I didn't think were done well. And I would even think about like pointing out, this is why these pages are successful. This is why these pages are not successful. I listened to interviews with, or read interviews or listened to interviews with comic creators. And then I had done that little short 4-page comic for the art history professor for his gallery show, kind of a thing with this, this print on demand self-publishing route where I had to really pay attention to things like where the live area was on a page, where the trim was, how much bleed, all those kind of technical things about making pages. But other than that, yeah, I kind of just went in cold and learned as I went. I do remember reading a lot of interviews with established comic creators where they're asked that like sound nugget kind of question, like what's the one piece of advice you'd tell upcoming comic creators? And so many of them would say, make sure you learn storytelling. And sometimes they'd even boil down what that meant, and they're like, make sure that the page reads without the dialogue. So when I started working on that first issue of Mouse Guard to really push myself and make sure I was never relying on the dialogue, I actually didn't write any dialogue. I just wrote like the stage direction and the outline form of like, this happens, then this happens, they run away. Kenzie says something inspirational here. I might have written down a few little things, like obviously the kind of the moral lesson of that first issue is it matters not what you fight, but what you fight for. I think I had written that by the time I was drawing pages, but yeah, what they were saying in individual word balloons, I didn't know, other than like in this one, Kenzie's saying something that is reassuring Liam that they can go back outside. But what he was actually saying, I don't know. I was going to figure that out when I was all done.
That actually reminds me a little bit of the early episodes of the Rugrats, where the babies didn't talk.
Oh, I don't remember that.
I may be entirely wrong. I may be misremembering, but for whatever reason, I remember the early season not having the kids talk.
Could very well be. I don't remember that, but that's interesting.
I do have a question that popped up as a result of this that isn't on our sheet, so I apologize if it doesn't come up with an immediate answer. Let's say that you didn't know comic books.
Yeah.
What form would you think you could have been successful with producing Mouse Guard in?
Yeah, there were times. So when I was in high school and even early college, all I knew was that I wanted to do something with art and storytelling. So there were times where I wanted to be a traditional 2D animator, or I wanted to be some kind of a special effects or prop artist, or I wanted to be a puppeteer. I wanted to do children's book illustration. I wanted to do comics. There was lots and lots of things I wanted to do. I just wanted to communicate stories with some form of art. So, I mean, I think Mouse Gaurd could have been a great stop motion film. It could have been a great puppetry film, or short episode thing. It could have been a written book with single illustrations, like a chapter book with single illustrations per chapter, or maybe a couple illustrations per chapter. Yeah, I think there's lots, and I really think that I can envision any version of those, and it's still working. The one that I think I would have wanted to avoid the most was a chapter book with illustrations, and that's only because of the Redwall thing. Like, Redwall had definitely already done that, and so having already felt like for a long time there, I can't do Mouse Gaurd because Brian Jakes already has. To then pick up and go like, well, and I'm going to do it in prose and with a couple beautiful illustrations. Like, that's definitely retreading the same wheel.
You do have Mouse Gaurd, the tabletop game. Could you have made an entire franchise based on tabletop Mouse Gaurds?
I suppose. I feel like there needs to be some kind of introduction. I mean, yeah, I guess, because there are other kind of medieval anthropomorphic tabletop games that are out right now. I'm blanking on all of their names. There's Mice and Mystics, but there's also, I want to say it's called Humblewood.
Humblewood.
And
We have Humblewood, the art director, coming up as a future guest.
Oh, cool. And Root. And so there are several of those that didn't have any kind of, IP presence before their game. So I guess it's possible. I don't know how effective I could be in trying to communicate all that. Like, the role-playing game book that we already have is pretty thick, and it's relying to some degree on, if you need more reference, go read the books. I don't know how we could have done that without making the Mouse Gaurd rule book being 3 books long.
Expansions, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
If I'm remembering the order of events in the timeline correctly, it seemed like you starting to go to conventions and the advent of the Mouse Gaurd as a fully realized comic sort of dovetailed pretty closely together. But from that point, did you have the intention for it to become a business venture, or was it still just kind of like passion project for the foreseeable future?
I think it was. I certainly didn't set out to go, I'm going to make this comic and it's going to allow me to quit my job and it's going to become my career and it's going to provide, this one comic is going to be my way in. And I don't remember exactly where the time frame works. I know that the first convention I went to was 6 months before. It was the fall of 2004, and then in the spring of 2005 is when the first issue of Mouse Gaurd comes out. So I know that timeline, but somewhere in there, again, Jesse Glenn, my good friend, best friend, he is the Kenzie to my Saxon. I was working at the antique store, and I was calling him to figure out, I think we were figuring out if we could get together that weekend and do something. And he was managing a coffee shop at the time. And we were talking about, needing to get to draw and needing the drawings to become a bigger part of our lives than just a casual when we can get together and draw. And he kind of lit a fire under me, I think without even realizing it. He's like, we got to do something because we can't be doing coffee and antiques when we're 40. And it just kind of made me aware that there was no room really for upward mobility at the job I was at. And there was nothing with that job that would help me get a better job. It would allow me maybe to make a lateral move. Maybe the next job could be better because it would be, closer to home or whatever. But it wasn't going to be any kind of hey, look, I've moved up in the world. I've just moved sideways. And then with art, I was like, the only way that that's going to happen is if I do something about it. Like the idea that just posting stuff randomly, fan art randomly on message boards was going to have some art director call me and say, we want you to do a comic series. Wasn't going to happen. No one's going to just show up and say, we want you to do something. You got to produce it. You got to put it out there in the world. So it's kind of the culmination of that, realizing this art thing isn't going to happen unless you go for it, unless you try something. And realizing that the long-term future of the day job was just going to stay plateaued. And so it wasn't like doing Mouse Gaurd was the thing that was going to get me out, but it wasn't. It was a step in the right direction. It wasn't going to hurt. It was only going to help. Even if it was a complete failure, and the only thing about it that was positive was, hey, look, I learned all these mistakes not to make next time. It was still going to be a positive step. I was just really lucky in that it went right. It all went right.
So what was the turning point where you realized, okay, I can quit my day job now? And did you see it coming?
That was when I saw it coming in that I wanted to, like, so for that first year when I'm writing and drawing issues and Archaea is publishing it nationally, I'm having to schedule time off from work. And there was a very complex way of seniority and asking for days off and who could get one weekend and then having to trade with people and do favors. Like, I really need this block of time off. Well, they were like, well, I'm going to Colorado for a ski trip then. Like, but I really need that weekend off because I know, like, that's New York Comic-Con or that's whatever it is. And having to work around that schedule, I wanted to quit within that first year just because Mouse Gaurd was taking off. I was getting like the first issue of Mouse Gaurd that Archaea published, we had a marketing strategy of Diamond solicits comic shops and says, we have this new comic coming out. How many copies would you like to order? And then Archaea gets those numbers and then prints based on those numbers. We ended up printing just a sliver over what was ordered, knowing that would mean that we would sell out very quickly. We would be able to fulfill what everybody requested, but if anybody asked for any restock, we were going to immediately have to go back to press. And what that means is we can send out a press release saying, Mouse Gaurd issue 1 sold out. It's so in demand. We had to go back to press. Right? And we knew that, and we played the game. The thing is, we didn't realize how in demand it was, and actually the fact that it was selling out and was harder to get made that problem worse. So we thought we'd do this initial print run that's really close to orders, and we do a small bumper, and that would cover us. Well, we did our small bumper as planned, except the demand was already exceeding what our small bumper was. And then we went to a third printing and a fourth printing, and that all happened, like, we were selling out within 2 days of issue 1 coming out. So I'm ready to quit the job right there. But Julia and I, sat down and went, what's the reality though? Like, we have to really look at what are our expenses? What if this all went away 2 months from now? What does that mean? How quickly could I get another illustration job? No, we should stick with the job for a while. And then it was when the hardcover numbers came in, when the pre-orders for the hardcover edition, and we looked at those and we calculated what that meant in terms of a royalty check, and we went, okay, so I need to be out there at more conventions promoting this thing, signing copies. I need to get work on the second book done faster than I did or more efficiently. The day job is doing nothing but holding that up. So let's pull that trigger. So it was expected in that I wanted it to, but because we had decided to be very fiscally responsible, I had no idea when that was going to happen, when it was going to become fiscally responsible enough to quit. So when the hardcover numbers came in, it was both expected but also unexpected because we didn't know that was going to be the tipping point. I'm
a little surprised that you were able to find success on your own in comics. My understanding has been, talking to other artists, is there's like no money in the comics, either as an artist or as a creator, because there's so much competition. You're going to be drowned out by Marvel and DC. And where do you even get the eyes to look on this, let alone people buy it? Do you have any thoughts about how to do anything at this level at this point in time as a beginner?
Yeah, I mean, I think that competing against Marvel and DC, what that really is going to boil down to is don't try to do the same kind of things they're trying to do. I think if you wanted to make an independent comic and you want to make it about superheroes, you've got a crazy uphill battle. If you say something different, if you make a horror comic, if you make a Western, if you make a slice of life kind of comic, if you make something that's very personal, autobiographical, some kind of fantasy in a way that's a little different than what's being offered out there, I think there's plenty of room to maneuver. Obviously, the whole system is a little different now than it was, but when I started. But the idea of going to a convention and being able to set up and get eyes on your stuff isn't impossible. Digital in some ways makes that easier to get your stuff out there. Like you can talk to Comixology as an individual and say, hey, I've got this comic and I'd like for you guys to list it in your store and come up with a contract between the two of you. The downside of digital is how do you separate the wheat from the chaff as a consumer? So there's so much out there. It is kind of easy to get drowned out virtually. But that's going back to that, like, if I was Peter Davidson, what kind of things would I do? You got to build a sense of community. You got to get people who see your work, who are going to recommend it to other people. And in some ways that goes beyond just your work. I think it can also be about who you are as a creator. You know, my fans have just as much connection to me and Julia and knowing about what's going on with our dogs, or that I'm a Michigander. Like, that's part of the identity that people know about with Mouse Gaurd, just as much as they know the artwork. And I know that's not a comfortable space for everybody, but I think that there's a part of that can help get more eyes on it, so that it's not just about it's about the complete package. It's about knowing exactly who's making this thing, so that it puts it in context. But yeah, it's possible to have a comfortable life, I think. The distribution system is hard. Also, when you say going at it alone, I only self-published the very first issue that was in black and white, and then I got a publishing contract with Archaea. And then they published the first issue in color, and then everything subsequent. So every hardcover, everything has all been done with a publisher. So they're doing all of the talking to the printer, financing the printing, doing the advertising, getting booth space, all that kind of stuff. They're the ones working with Diamond and the distribution company. If you had to do that on your own, that's hard. And also, if you are self-publishing, probably the percentage that you're going to be able to, or the cost of goods to manufacture is going to be higher for you than it might be for even a small publisher, especially if you're doing like a print on demand, just because of volume. If you've ever gone and had like party invitations printed, you know that the more you print, the more per item the cost comes down. So just the volume that a publisher is going to be able to get to because they're distributing means they're going to have a lower per unit cost than you as an individual might, especially if you're going print on demand. And when the distributor needs to buy it at less than wholesale, because then they're selling it to their stores to the stores for wholesale, and the stores have to make money, and then they're selling it to their customers. That's harder. What it just means is you have to sell direct to consumer if you're going at it alone. And now with online stores and Etsy and all that kind of stuff, that's easier now than it ever has been, other than it's easy to get drowned out because there's lots of stuff out there. But I think it's very doable. I think Kickstarter has also kind of proven, while you could have success selling thousands of copies of something through a regular distribution chain, if you go through Kickstarter and the money comes direct to you, you can sell hundreds and actually make more money than you would have doing thousands through the normal distribution chain. But that also means you have fewer fans, consuming, and with people falling away, between volume 1 and volume 2, it's going to make volume 2 that much harder to get out.
Have you been with the same publisher throughout, or have you changed publishers?
I've been with Archaea throughout. We've had a couple of rocky times when there have been regime changes at the top, but we've been able to work things out, and then most recently they were purchased by Boom, which was an established comic publisher, and things have been very steady since then. Archaea had some great moments and had some not great moments when it was completely independent, and other people would come in, and then people would try to raise investment opportunity and things like that. And it really all depended on who was in the room at what time for what the mood and tone of Archaea was. But as once Boom was able to pick them up and absorb them, it's been very steady, very consistent. So I've stuck with them.
We haven't had a guest on that has worked with a publisher before, so I'm a little curious to train on this if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
So why would somebody want to work with a publisher rather than you mentioned some things already, so we don't have to go over this again, but like as far as like the payoff, how much do you have to lose in order to work with a publisher versus how much you have to gain from working with a publisher?
Yeah, so without going too much into specifics, I have a slightly different contract than most of the regular people do at Boom. And that all has to do with when Archaea was founded. It was founded by a guy who was a creator who had been mistreated by a publishing company, had gotten his rights back, and started Archaea so that he could self-publish his comic. So when he opened the doors for other creators, his contract was very creator friendly. And I have, for the most part, been able to keep that contract exactly intact and the way it was from the beginning. It's been grandfathered in. So I know that the base contract with publishing companies is not the same as what I have. But I mean, I wear a lot of hats to be able to create Mouse Gaurd. I write it, I pencil it, I ink it, I color it, I letter it, I do all the digital work of getting it ready for press. And then I maintain the Mouse Gaurd website and all that kind of stuff. That's just to create the work. To then publish it, there are lots of hats there. I can only wear so many hats. So if you're a sole creator working on your property and you're already finding lettering, web presence, coloring, drawing, etc., already a handful, I don't know that you want to be adding in print supervisor, marketing, print financier, did I ever say advertising? Advertising again, let's say. And then the distribution chain, storage, shipping. Yeah, it's there's a lot. I've because of all the years of being at Archaea and even getting to see, like I said, different regime changes and seeing how different versions of Archaea has handled those things at different times. Because sometimes they have a warehouse that they own where the books go, and then Archaea has those. It means they can dip into that stock if they want to go to a convention. It means that they can ship them out to Diamond when Diamond says, hey, we need more copies. But that's their facility that they're managing. Now, if you're an individual, that means your garage or you're getting a storage unit or something like that. Archaea has also at times worked with a company that does warehousing. So Archaea doesn't own that building. They're just saying, hey, you guys will store our stuff for us. There's also somebody there so that when we call up and say, we need 3 more copies or 3 more pallets of this, and we need it shipped here or we need it shipped there, you guys will just ship it for us. And that's all part of the payment fee that they do with them. So there's different ways of doing it, and researching for an individual what works best is a lot of work. Yes, you can do it all. It's totally possible as an individual to do all of those things. but yeah, a publisher is going to have a better chance at getting good convention presence. A publisher, if we ever get back to conventions, that is, a publisher is going to have better distribution models. It's going to have better ways of storing. It's going to be able to get better price breaks on printing. It's going to be able to competitively shop at multiple printers, because it also means that, like, when a publisher is ready to publish a volume of Mouse Gaurd, chances are they have a couple more books that they also need to publish. And so they can strike a deal with a printer. And instead of just saying, hey, we need X number of copies of Mouse Gaurd, what can you do for us with a price? They're saying, we're publishing 3 books right now, or we're printing 3 books right now. With that volume of work, what kind of price break can you give us? And then they can shop that around to multiple printers. So they're going to get the best kind of deal just because of volume. In terms of keeping costs low. There's lots of bonuses. Does that
better deal actually make its way towards you, or is that the publisher keeping the extra proceeds?
No, I have so the deal I have, and it's the way most creator contracts work at publishers, not all. I know Image has a very specialized creator contract, but for most creator-owned contracts at publishers, it's a profit split after costs are absorbed. So, we get the breakdown. If they say this is how much it costs to print, this is how much we're in the red because of this and advertising and shipping. Then they say this is how many units sold at this, at this price. This is how many sold at this price for various discounts for either distribution or convention sales or whatever. And then we just split the profit. So if it costs less to print, yeah, we're going to be getting out of the red faster.
Our friend Shane in chat said to listen to you and to also do their homework before signing anything, and also have a lawyer look over to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've had a couple different lawyers really save my butt when it came to contract stuff. I've also been fortunate enough that the first contract that I had to sign was the one with Mark Smiley, who had founded Archaea. And it was written in very plain English and was very creator friendly. And so at the point where I wasn't really in this industry and I didn't know who to contact in terms of an entertainment lawyer, and I couldn't really even afford getting a lawyer at that time, or worrying about the added expense, that contract happened to be very simple for me. It's, again, one of those times where I was just really fortunate and the stars aligned for me. The later times where I had lawyers that were saving my butt, I was already well known in the industry and was able to either have good contacts or could get good recommendations or had the finances to be able to say, okay, I need to hire you to look at this and make sure I'm not getting screwed.
The thing is, when someone says, like, do your homework, the hard part is often you don't realize what you need to, what questions you'd ask until after you had already gotten to the situation. Like when I bought this house, I was told, you look at everything. Okay, well, I didn't know to look at the pipes inside the in the access panels, stuff like that. But now, after the fact, I have to replace those pipes because I didn't look at them before. But now you have that experience. So what are some things that you think that are easy to miss, but would be really good to think about when starting?
Yeah, the things about contracts that you need to be aware of are, when do they end, or do they ever end? Is the thing you need to watch out for. Is there ever a time where this will just naturally end? Whether it's a ticking clock or after something is out of print for a certain amount of time, or does this just go on in perpetuity? That's something to watch out for. And I don't want to give some kind of a blanket, this is how it should be, because everybody's case is different. But knowing how it ends or when it ends naturally. And then there's also, if there's ever any kind of like breach clause, where one party doesn't live up to their part of the deal and the other party wants to cancel because of that, wants to say now the contract is not valid because there was a breach. Knowing how the breach clause works, including do they have time to rectify it. So like a very common kind of breach clause would be something like a publisher needs to pay you every quarter based on if there are any profits to be had, and they need to show you some kind of a statement breaking down what the profits are if there are any. and they have 30 days or 60 days from the close of the quarter to provide that for you. Okay. Now, and to accurately provide that to you. Now, if 61 days comes and goes and you don't have a statement, do you just get to go breach? Or they pay you, there's an accounting error and they pay you $1,000 less than they owe you? Do you just get to say breach, whole thing's canceled? Probably not. There's probably a thing in there that allows them an additional certain amount of time, 30 days, 90 days, something, to rectify the situation. And that can be good because obviously a publisher who makes a simple accounting error, or because of a weird holiday break, or somebody having to be out sick, means that they might get something to you late. There might be an error. As long as they rectify it, right, the relationship should go on. But that can also create a loophole where it's possible for a publisher to not do what they say until you call breach. And then when you call breach, they still have 30 days to make it right. And you can't get out of it. And they can continue to do that every time if they're a terrible publisher. So just being aware of what those situations are. I think also knowing about the stuff about how the finances are calculated. From if people remember back to high school math, there is an order of operations when it comes to certain mathematical problems. And if you do the multiplication before you do the subtraction, or if you do the subtraction before you do the multiplication, it comes up with very different numbers in the end. And so how are things calculated? What percentage is the percentage being calculated before or after their subtraction for various fees, things like that. Most of that should be pretty simple to read out, but you need to figure out where percentages come out and when.
Sounds like you might need an accountant on top of a lawyer.
I think a lawyer would be usually a lawyer is pretty good at being able, especially if it's an entertainment lawyer. Because that's one of the things that they're dealing with the most, is trying to make sure that you can retain some kind of rights to be able to, like, usually an entertainment lawyer is doing stuff more like with movie or TV or film kind of stuff than publishing contracts. But even still, it's about you retaining some kind of rights to your IP, but also making sure that you get the best financial deal, because that also means they get the best financial deal.
So that some of that touches a little bit on the next question that I had. Above and beyond working with a publisher, I'm curious to hear a little bit about protecting your IP when it comes to licensing and copyright. And I won't name the corporation. You can if you want to. Or I don't know if it's what the legality is there, but
are we talking about Disney? Is that?
Yeah, you have some dark stories to tell about Disney.
Yeah.
The silver lining to those stories is that you came out the other end still retaining rights to create your comics. Can you tell us a little bit about navigating that process so you didn't lose everything to Disney, which could have happened, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, probably not. So for those unaware, the Mouse Gaurd film rights were sold to Fox. That's a deal that I made. They were in the process of being purchased by Disney at the time. We knew that was happening. That wasn't a complete surprise. We didn't know that the deal would necessarily go through. We had also hoped we were far enough into filming that Disney wouldn't cancel us. That we'd be far enough into filming that there'd be no reason for Disney to even get involved with a Mouse Gaurd film, because they'd be looking at the stuff that would be easier for them to stop and save money on. So the film rights were sold to Fox, and then Disney bought Fox, and we were not as far in. And Disney, just like any corporate takeover, there's a kind of a marking your territory pissing contest kind of a thing, where the new parent company wants to say everything belongs to us now, and we make the rules, not you, old company, makes the rules. So if there's any old outstanding contracts that we had an opportunity to get out of, we're going to get out of them, because we want our boilerplate, on those with all of our clauses, our legal clauses, and what we ask for. We don't want the loopholes you guys would have allowed. We also want our execs to have the power, not your execs to still have power. It's that. There's some of that kind of stuff involved. So that's ultimately what happened. But all of the rights stuff for me still to be able to create things were all ironed out when it was just Fox. And I've gone to bat a few different times with movies. The Fox go around was not my first at dealing with studios and looking at contracts and negotiating with producers and that kind of thing. And I think it was pretty standard that I would be able to create comics. I don't think there was ever a version that came my way, contract-wise or movie offer-wise, where they were like, hey, we own everything and you could no longer make Mouse Gaurd comics. I don't think that was ever... I think everybody's smart enough to know that's not going to fly with me, and it's also not in their best interest. But other rights did get restricted in the older versions where we would have to negotiate. And so that is where I had an entertainment lawyer working with me for the Fox deal. And most of it was pretty obvious. It was just getting it written into legalese and having somebody else be there in the room to negotiate for me so that I'm not there feeling hot-headed and taking it personally. It's nice to have someone who already speaks that language and can just go like, hey, this is what my client wants, take it or leave it. Where I'm like, how dare you? How dare you?
That would be me too.
Yeah. But we agreed pretty early on. What we said was we want it so that while obviously there's film and media rights and merchandising rights that get tied up with any kind of a film deal, that it should not infringe on the way that Julia and I run Mouse Gaurd right now. So I should still be able to make books. I should still be able to keep making the kind of tabletop games that I'm making. I should still be able to go to conventions and make t-shirts and prints. We had a little bit of merchandise at the time. We had some little plush Mouse Gaurd stuffed animals and enamel pins and things like that. And so we just came up with a legalese way of saying convention merchandise. I can still make convention merchandise where I also don't have to share any of the profits with them because it's such small potatoes. It's ridiculous to what they're talking about. So yeah, they were pretty amenable to that. I think there was a little bit of, we did retain the rights to do, I think we called it classic merchandise or something like that, meaning that if there's a Mouse Gaurd film being made, there's obviously going to be an aesthetic to that that's different than my book, just because movies are different than books. It's going to be an interpretation. So, and also there'd be probably character changes and other little details with costuming and colors and proportions and stuff. So they can make all the movie merchandise they want. But if I want to make a statue or a new game or a new whatever that's based on my classic look, the look of my books, I still have the rights to do that. And there was a little bit of, I remember some finagling there that the lawyer had to do. That was a little bit of a trick. But I think the base part of like, hey, I still get to go to conventions and make prints. I still get to go to conventions and print up some t-shirts and hand sell them. Nobody at Fox was like, how dare you? They were like, of course, David and Julia should be able to keep doing what they're doing at conventions.
So when you're,
but it was not boilerplate. My lawyer did have to work with them. It wasn't a fight, but they did have to actually create those clauses.
Were you gonna say something, Moose?
I said, well, you can continue doing conventions, but as long as there isn't a pandemic in the next
right.
All right. So when you're at this point, where Fox is talking about making your movie, and that's not even like the first movie negotiation that you've been through, your creation has now taken on this life that I would, just as an outsider, I don't know if you feel this, but as an outsider, I would imagine that would just feel so big that you're now looking up at this thing that you were once looking down on as the creator and the master of this universe. And when we get into a personal project, we're completely liberated from any external pressures. You know, you could just you do whatever you want to do. It's your world. Now when it's kind of a dome above you in that way, do you get to a point where you start feeling like an employee of your own IP?
I don't think the movie stuff ever made me feel that way.
Maybe
I
not
think
the
I was
movie
also,
stuff, yeah, but just like kind of like when it reaches that tipping point of cultural identifiability.
I think it's the fan. It's not even that it's widespread or anything like cultural identity, or that it's big enough now where there could be a movie. What it really is meeting with passionate fans, whether they are emailing me or it's a online message boardy kind of thing, or Twitch or Discord or something like that, or if it's in person at a convention back when we could do those things, where they are impassioned and they have questions and they're like, look, I've looked it up in the role-playing game and this character does this and this does this. Now that mean in the next book, in the Weasel War, are we going to find more out about blah, 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 blah? And they're giving very like specific real stuff. And it just shows you that there's a level of expectation. Like, not only have I been building a level of expectation on myself that I want every book to be better than the last one. I want to do a better job at what I did last time. I want to break new ground. I want to try something different. I don't want to just tell the same story, but I also want it to be better art-wise. I want it to be better storytelling-wise. You know, and then there's the fan expectation. And there's a little bit of that. The more books you tell, or the more stories you tell, the more you're painting yourself into that corner potentially. And this next book that I'm working on right now is a prequel. It's the Weasel War. It's that war that I talked about at the beginning, where it's like, we'll figure that stuff out later. So I've had years of thinking about what that could be, in just like building it up for myself. I was very careful not to pin down too many details, so I didn't lock myself too much into a corner or have to rewrite it after I've already written it. But now it's this vague cloud monster hanging over my head that includes all the fan expectations, all of my own expectations, world setting expectations. Like, hey, in this, you've kind of already promised you need to explain this, and this. Yeah, it's a lot. And because of that, this next book is going very slowly.
Yeah, younger people that might not know this story or even know who Bob Dylan is, maybe? Are we at that generation yet where kids don't know about Bob Dylan? But anyway, he's a folk singer, strictly acoustic, decides to go electric. Fans lose their shit. They're burning his records. They're boycotting. It's just like complete mayhem, because he wanted to go from acoustic folk to electric rock. Do you ever feel like Bob Dylan?
No, I don't think I do. Because to stretch that metaphor, means I would be delving into some other kind of like storytelling style, maybe even switching mediums, like going from, or like instead of doing comics, doing children's book illustration or animation or puppetry or something by myself. Or it just means like switching genres, like instead of doing this kind of fantasy all ages adventure story, going like, I'm going to do something that's straight horror. And I don't mind dabbling in those things or playing with the idea of those things. But I never have enough of an itch where I'm like, yeah, I just want to do straight horror right now, or I want to do straight comedy comics right now, or I just want to do puppetry. I never feel that way. So yeah, I don't have as much of a feeling locked in. Occasionally, and I think that I do some variant cover work for other publishers. I get hired to do Ninja Turtle covers or Usagi Yojimbo or Locke Key and stuff like that. And when I get to do those, there's enough of a like scratching a different itch where it's not Mouse Gaurd that it feels good to be getting back into Mouse Gaurd.
What about a cabin in the woods type of thing, where the audience expects you to go a certain route, and you choose not to go that route, so they destroy the world?
Oh boy, I hope not. I hope nobody's that upset with anything that I do ever. Yeah, it's a balance though, right? Because especially when it's a prequel story. But also, I've established myself as a certain kind of storyteller, and I think people have expectations about what that means. I know that obviously right now, in recent years, J.K. Rowling has proved to be a problematic creator, but I still, separating the art from the artist, I still love those books to death. And I think that if you look at the tonal differences between the first book and the seventh book, and kind of seeing the progression in between, they are very different, but there's nothing so dissimilar from book 1 to book 7 that growth makes sense. And that's kind of like where I want to be in terms of that. Like, they all get a little bit more complicated. They all get a little bit darker. And not even darker, but just, they deal with more stuff, more real emotions as they go on. And I think that reflects both the story needing to get more complicated, but also the growth of the creator who's making them and having all the experiences of the previous books under their belt. And that's what I want for me. So I want the next book to definitely be different. So there should be things in there that you didn't see coming and feels like growth. But I don't want it to be so different where you feel like as an audience member, I've betrayed you. I've completely changed who I am. I was in disguise all along.
Yeah, I think there's like two versions about that, right? There's the reasonable. Oh, I can see why they made that decision. It fits the story. Like say the Red Wedding with Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, right? That totally changed the story, but it fit. Versus if you were to suddenly make a change that was making mostly like half the audience uncomfortable, like you were to make your political views known or whatever, and have that turn into the new story, like your modern contemporary political views known, that sort of thing. Yeah. So there's like different ways that it can be handled, either poorly or more reasonably. Sure.
Yeah. I think the book needs to stay within reason of what it always was. Plot twists are different than drastic changes to the tone of the book.
Well, not to make too hard of a pivot away from a Mouse Gaurd, but while we still have a bit of time left to us, I definitely want to get into plugging Onlinecon, because this is a great concept. This is a great thing that you've started doing. Back in 2020, when all conventions were decimated, some moved to online platforms, and you took the bold step and just said, I'm going to do my own. And you made Onlinecon, very straightforward name. Can you tell us?
No one was using it. No one was using Onlinecon as its own thing. I was amazed.
It's brilliant. Well, tell us a little bit about that. What is Onlinecon?
Sure. So Onlinecon is an event on my Twitch stream where I'm trying to recreate some of the feeling of being at a convention again. I saw how in the early days, different people were trying to organize different things, and there were people who were doing blocks of time and then raiding the next group. I saw people who were just making a landing page that had links to all kinds of different online stores, individual artists' online stores. And while I applaud the idea of trying to form that community, it just didn't feel cohesive enough. It always kind of reminded me of like back in the early days of the internet, where you'd be on a ring. There used to be link rings, where if you were a certain kind of a page, you could get in the puppetry ring of links. And you'd even put in code so that at the bottom of your page, there was a next, previous, and random. And it would just go to some other random, let's say, puppetry web page. But there was nothing really in common with them except somebody moderated all of those things together. And it was the impetus of the user to move on to the next thing, onto the next page. So I thought I want to do mine where it's all on my Twitch stream. And there's only so much me sitting there drawing that people are going to want to watch. So actually, the first one I ever did of these was back when Emerald City was canceled at the beginning of 2020. And I had bought a lot of product. And I was like, how am I going to... I got to move this stuff. I can't just put it in my store and just say, oh, hopefully it'll sell. I need to, promote it. And at that time, I didn't have a regular streaming schedule. So I said, so at that point, me drawing was a novelty online. And I went, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit and stream all the hours that I would normally be at the convention. And we'll run an online sale. And just to break up the monotony, once per day, I'm gonna pull up Skype and I'm gonna Skype call one of my friends. We're gonna call Jeremy Bastian. We're gonna call Corey Godby. We're gonna call Katie Cook. We're gonna call Jesse Glenn, but only once per day for like 20 to 40 minutes, just for funsies. And people really enjoyed it and said, when are you going to do another online con? So I did one in the middle of last year, but I was like, at this point, I'm streaming regularly. So the novelty of just me sitting and drawing isn't enough. And it didn't feel like I was getting that community. So I said, this time we're going to have guests. So I'm going to alternate between an hour of me drawing, and then I'm going to bring on a guest. So for 8 hours a day for 5 days, we've got a total of 40 hours of streaming with 20 different guests. And I try to bring together all different kinds of stuff. I don't want to just bring together comic book artists or just comic book inkers or people just in comics. I want to bring in lots of stuff. I try to bring in writers, sculptors, people who do music, all kinds of things. So yeah, I'm really pleased that just this coming week, from Wednesday, which is the 24th, through Sunday the 28th, I'll be streaming from 2 to 10 p.m. Eastern time every one of those days. And we're going to have a really great list of guests that include comic book artists, archivists and historians, colorists, inkers, illustrators, puppeteers, directors, musicians. We have somebody who's going to come on and do a baking segment, show us how to bake a pie. I think she's doing a pie. So
yeah,
Where can we find this information?
Yeah.
So on my blog, I have a post about Onlinecon, but you have to scroll back a couple weeks. So I do a new blog post every Tuesday. I will probably, on this coming Tuesday, repost all the Onlinecon information again so that it's right at the top during the convention so that people can find the schedule. It's also available here on my Discord channel. And I think you can get that info on my Twitch page. You might not be able to when I'm not streaming. You might have to type ! Discord when I'm live. I should probably correct that. But on my Discord channel, there's a link for or a whole section for Onlinecon with the schedule and with all the faces and all the events going on. And I release new products as well. There's going to be some new prints going in my online store, and I'll open up a commission list. But I'm ultimately more excited about all the guests that are going to be coming in.
We'll grab a link to your Discord and put it in the show notes as well, so if somebody finds it through here, we'll link to that.
Thank you.
Have you only done your own online convention, or have you participated in any of the other online convention offerings?
I don't think I have, other than I don't think I've done any of the other online convention offerings. I've done, during this time, I've done a couple like school visits. I don't think I've done. I don't think so. Over the last year, I've done a lot of staring at that little green light on my webcam, talking into a microphone to virtual faces. I don't think any of them have been for conventions, though.
Well, who knows, right?
Yeah. Who knows what I'm doing? Who are you guys again? What's this that I'm on?
What have been some big highlights for you in your own online convention things that really stand out for you as great memories when you've done this in the past?
So last time back in August, and all the Onlinecon stuff is archived on my Twitch page if you go to the videos section. Unfortunately, because I stream nonstop throughout the day, each one of those videos is 8 hours long. So there's a lot to get through if you want to get to, try to scrub through to a specific part. First of all, I think I've been excited about every guest. Every guest has had something really interesting. But, sometimes there's a convergence of a couple couple stars that align and you go, holy cow, that only comes around once every 1,000 years kind of a thing. And we had 5 of the concept artists from the Mouse Gaurd film able to come in and get clearance to show concept work and to talk about it. And they were joining us, I think, from 3 different continents while we talked, which was really cool. Just I kind of made a point of like, this isn't about being sad and wallowing in, oh, the Mouse Gaurd film didn't happen. This is about celebrating the fact that these people's work finally is able to be seen. Let's get to see what they were doing and what they were thinking, and just be grateful that we get to see this stuff and celebrate their artistry. That was pretty special. I wrote a new Mouse Gaurd story for the last Onlinecon, and we had actress Meredith Salinger, who was Natty Gann in The Journey of Natty Gann, and she was in Dream a Little Dream. She's done some Star Wars animated voice acting. She came in and read that story aloud for the audience. So everybody got a new Mouse Gaurd story read by Meredith Salinger. We had a really interesting panel that was the science of Mouse Gaurd. A friend of mine, Kishore Hari, does a regular thing. Or he used to do it in person back in the long ago when we could see each other in person. Now he does a version of it on Twitch, but it was called The Science of Movies. And he used to do it at the Alamo Draft House, and they would do like a little, maybe 20-minute preamble before showing some kind of a movie where they would talk a little bit briefly about the science of the movie. Then they'd watch the movie. And then at the end of the movie, they would do an actual presentation on the merits of the science in the movie. And it wasn't just beating up Hollywood for getting it wrong. It was also like, let's take this part as true, and then what's the science implications after that? Or how close is this to real science, even if the details they got were wrong? And he did one of those that was the science of Mouse Gaurd. That was fast. I knew it was going to be interesting because Kishore is great, but I really didn't know how good that was going to be.
Was that from the first or second?
That was from the first. Yeah, the second one, we've got some great stuff coming up, but obviously hasn't happened yet. So I don't know how great it's all going to be. But yeah, coming up, we're going to have a musical performance from Very Handsome Billy, who's a streamer on Twitch. We've got the baking segment from Aaron Godby. Meredith Salinger is going to come back and read a story. Armand Balthazar is an illustrator for a book series called Timeless. And he does those kind of special books that are like a James Gurney Dinotopia, those hybrid books where it's not a picture book, but it's not just an illustrated novel. Like, it has more illustrations than an illustrated novel, but it has more words than a picture book or than a portfolio. And to make his very realistic painted illustrations, he has physical models and maquettes. So I reached out to Armand. He and I are friends, and I was like, hey, you and I have this in common, because I build little set pieces for Mouse Gaurd, and I know you have maquettes when you're working on stuff for Timeless. Let's maybe talk about that. And he went, I don't build my maquettes, though, or my models, but I've got model maker friends. And I was like, do you think they'd want to come and join? And he's like, would you be okay with that? And I'm like, absolutely. It turns out both of them have done a trillion things in the movie industry, including both having lots of credits at ILM and Lucasfilm. So it's going to be Armand and these, one of them's more of a soft-edged kind of creature designer. One of them's more of an architectural spaceship model maker. And the 4 of us are going to talk about the relationship between physical 3D objects and 2D flat illustrations, and the union between the two, and how they each can inform each other.
I can also throw out last year you did video. It was on the introduction to world building and also how to draw like yourself. I believe those were the two titles.
That wasn't part of Onlinecon. That was just random. Oh. That was just random, like Twitch. I don't feel like drawing today. I'm gonna run the. I'm gonna run a lecture that I've done before. But I did. Yeah, I did those last year. Yeah, and they're up on my YouTube channel, I believe. Also, if you don't want to burrow through Twitch to find it.
Your memory isn't as good as you think it is, or at least mine isn't.
I don't think I ran those during Onlinecon. I don't know. Last year all blends together anyways, right?
That's very true. But I'll just take the hit on that. I'm pretty sure I'm wrong then.
If that's all you're wrong about this month, you're in good shape.
Sure, we'll go with that.
So on our way towards wrapping up, I would like to swing by Mouse Gaurd one more time and ask you what's on the horizon? What's coming down the line for Mouse Gaurd? Is there anything that you're excited about that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm working on the next book, which is called The Weasel War of 1149. Because of the way publishing works, I need to get far enough into the series so that by the time issue 1 is solicited, there's no way that as the issues are coming out, it'll ever catch up to my production schedule. So even though I've been talking about it and showing off in-process work to people for a long time, I'm still not far enough into it that we can start to publish or even project a publishing date. I'm trying to be regimented about getting the work done without also putting unnecessary pressure on myself. So there is a little bit of like, it'll come when it comes, just keep working. Let's not put down a hard date in stone yet. But yeah, I'm working on that. It's a prequel book. It's a big war story. It'll be 8 issues instead of 6, but we're going to break that up into 2 4-issue chunks just to make publishing easier on everybody. That way also Mouse Gaurd fans won't get hit with a big price tag, or maybe even new readers won't get hit with a big price tag of a big new book. It'll be 2 smaller ones. So that's kind of the long-term plans. Short term, there's just some reprinting stuff. The Mouse Gaurd role-playing game has been out of print for a little while. We knew we were getting low at the end of 2019. And we were like, okay, there's probably going to be a little bit of a gap where we don't have the RPG in print, but we're gonna take care of that right at the beginning of 2020. We're gonna make sure we get that back to print. And then when the pandemic happened, that completely changed everybody's finances. It changed how printers were operating. It changed how shipments were coming in and out of the U.S. And so everything got put on hold. But the reprinting of the RPG box set is back on track, and we're projecting, I think, August or September for that to be available again. And there's going to be this summer, I think we're targeting July, but it hasn't been solicited yet, so I can't promise, is going to be a new Mouse Gaurd single issue that is going to reprint a couple of the free comic book day stories that people might have missed out on, as well as that new story that I mentioned that Meredith Salinger read during the last Onlinecon, and it was called The Owl Hen Caregiver.
Shane in the chat is suggesting that we ask you about Plot Masters. You mentioned it briefly in passing earlier. The Plot Master Project is a podcast that you do. Is that still happening? He says new episodes are coming out soon.
Yeah, new episode. So my friend Jesse and I, we used to write and draw comics together in high school, and we were pretty good about archiving all the old stuff. And some kids in high school just want to sit down and draw their favorite existing characters. And Jesse and I did some of that. We obviously, we drew some Ninja Turtles and some X-Men and stuff. We were also way more interested with creating our own stuff, which, the term IP or intellectual property, we weren't aware of that being a thing in those days. But we basically created, between the two of us, about 30 IPs. Some of them were mine, some of them were his, some of them were things we did together where they're jointly owned. And like I said, we'd been good over the years about archiving all that stuff. So the Plotmaster Project is a video podcast. Go to theplotmasters.com, where we dig up the old drawings and we show everybody our old embarrassing artwork. We talk about what the story ideas were, what we were influenced by, if we were blatantly ripping something off, or if it came up through some other conversation. And then we each, as illustrators now, do one new piece of artwork showing what it would look like if we were working on this thing now. And it's not just an art update. It's also sometimes a complete edit. It's going, there's some cool bones to that idea of these characters or this story, but man, it needs to get reworked from the ground up. I'd edit this part out. I'd remove that character. I'd shift the tone. I'd make this genre more genre specific. I'd make it less genre specific. So yeah, we each do our update. The schedule for that got really out of whack because both of us had personal stuff going on. My mom was going through some health stuff before she passed for several years that took up my attention. Jesse had some personal work stuff going on that was taking up his. And so at this point, without putting too much pressure on it, we do new episodes when we can. And we did 3 new episodes all at once for the last Onlinecon. And we've got 2 new episodes for this Onlinecon. And actually, the 2 episodes for this Onlinecon will round out what we're going to call season 1. We kind of broke down all those IPs into 4 sections, into 4 seasons. So that's the plan. And I think, we haven't talked specifics, but I think we'd both like to maybe run a Kickstarter. Jesse and I would both like to maybe do a Kickstarter that's like an art of book, kind of celebrating everything from season 1. That would have nice scans of the old stuff, scans of the new stuff, process. I think there are a couple instances where we found stuff after an episode had gone out where we were like, oh, this is a cool piece. I didn't realize we still had this. This would have been good to put in the episode. If we can fit some of that stuff into an art book, we'd like to, but nothing concrete on that yet. But that's where we are. And yeah, 2 more episodes to go to round out season 1, and plenty more in the future for when Jesse and I both have the time and wherewithal to do more.
Very cool. Well, coming into our wrap up, we wanted to make a quick announcement that there will actually not be an episode of Art Condition next week, because we want to encourage everybody to go and watch Onlinecon. This channel will be hosting your channel as a part of that. So yeah, definitely go check that out. Can you say the dates, the start and end dates again?
Sure. It's Wednesday, the March 24th through Sunday, March 28th.
And you're going to be making a blog post pretty soon with the schedule or like a schedule of what your events are going to be.
Yep. On Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, that blog post will go up. It'll be an echo of a blog post, I think, from 3 weeks ago. So if you just go to my blog and scroll back about 3 weeks, you'll see an Onlinecon post that has the entire guest list and the schedule. But yeah, on Tuesday, just before Onlinecon goes live, I'll make sure that I kind of repost that post so that it's right at the top for everyone.
Oh, Moose was just about to ask a question, and it dropped him. While he's coming back on,
I appreciate you guys preempting for Onlinecon. That's very generous of you guys.
Oh, sure. Right.
Yeah. In fact, during this time slot that you guys normally would be broadcasting, we're going to be having the guests of Donato Giancola, who's a world-class master illustrator, modern master who does Lord of the Rings illustrations. And he's also a illustration teacher. And also Kevin McTurk will be one of the guests during this time as well. And he is a director of short puppetry films. I totally recommend checking out his work. I think it's thespiritcabinet.com or spiritcabinet.com. I can't remember the exact URL, but check out Kevin's work.
I will be watching.
I was going to say, when I looked at the schedule, I saw that Donato was in our time slot, and I was like, "There's no way." I mean, we want Donato on our show at some point, so we're not going to be like, "Hey, we cannot find anybody better for our guest that would be better than Donato on OnlineCon." So it just makes sense to host because that's great information. We strongly encourage everybody to watch.
Thank you.
Well, aside from OnlineCon, if people wanted to find out more about you and what you do, where would you like people to go first?
Probably a good hub is mousegaurd.net. There's a link to my blog there. There's a link to my social media. I'm at MouseGaurd on Twitter and Instagram. I don't think there's a link to my Twitch page, which in some ways is where I'm most active because I still stream 2 days a week. Yeah, I'm probably more active on Twitch than I am, even though they're social media. But yeah, any of those, you can find me. I'm around.
Yeah, right on. Cool. Moose, did you have any follow-up questions? Anything?
No, the only thing I had was Don Lee's question asked earlier?
Oh yeah, we didn't get to that. Yeah, if we can run it down relatively quickly. Earlier in the chat, Don Lee had a question about self-publishing, specifically digital self-publishing. If you don't mind circling back to that real quick.
Sure.
His question specifically was, does he or you, David, have any experience or thoughts on digital self-publishing? And he expanded a little bit that he's been thinking about doing a kid's book and he has no knowledge about publishing. He thought it might be easier to digitally self-publish, but no in-depth knowledge. And wondering if he did that, would that be a good way to get publishers interested?
So I have very little experience doing any kind of digital self-publishing stuff on my own. I mean, I know that my books are available through, Kindle and Comixology and things like that. Children's books, I mean, maybe it's dated thinking. I tend to think of children's books as needing to be physical objects that a child can hold, and that the turn of the page is an attention holder, a climactic event, a way to keep anticipation going. So I have no idea what the digital children's book market is, but I know that it is possible as an individual to get your work on something like a Kindle, or to make PDFs available that are distributed somewhere other than sending them like right to your website. Like when I'm at a convention and people go, they don't know that I'm published, and they ask, like, if I don't buy all these books, how do I get them? And I say, you can order them through your local comic shop, or you can get them on Amazon. And they suddenly go like, oh, you're on Amazon. Like, this is like a legitimacy thing. If I had said, oh, you have to go to my website, you can order them from my website. If you go to mousegaurd.net, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly I seem like I'm small potatoes. I don't seem like I'm a real published person to them. If you can get your book either through like an Amazon Kindle, or I don't know what other book hubs there are for PDFs that would give that legitimacy. I know like through comics, there are a couple, including Comixology. But I do know that with Kindle, it is possible to do it to make that connection and get something on that site as by yourself without having a publisher. A lot of that always, whenever you self-publish anything, whether it's physical or digital, it also means that the push to get people to go buy it is on you. You're the one who still has to do the advertising. You have to do the marketing push. You're the one who has to get the word out there. So just because it's up on Amazon doesn't mean it's going to sell. Digital or physical, you're going to have to draw people to it, push people to it, and bang that drum.
Fair enough. Right on. Last question. Our trademark final. Besides work and personal projects, David, what's one thing that's happening in the world right now that you're excited about?
Vaccines. Science.
Yeah.
Science, and while we have argued, some people have argued, about the legitimacy of science with something as simple as a mask. I feel like, and maybe it's just that I've closed off, I've formed my own bubble or closed off some chattery voices in my life, whichever way you want to look at it. I feel like I'm hearing less pushback about vaccines than I am about masks. In some ways, no. I know that there are still the, it's a hoax, it's a 5G, I'll never take it. But I also know that a lot of people who pushed back about wearing masks are announcing that they've gotten their first shot. And I feel like that's progress with those people, but even just in general, the fact that we were able to get those done and that the first one was done without actually any government assistance, and that we're breaking new ground when it comes to the way that those mRNA vaccines are working. It's a completely different biological technology in how to combat stuff. And I think that that's going to be like, not only did we just streamline the pipeline for medical advancement, whether it's with COVID or anything, did we just figure out a better way to research vaccines and medicines. We also just came up with a new technology for how to combat them that I have a feeling is going to have ripple effects when it comes to other diseases, other things that we're trying to combat, like cancers. That even if it's not directly applicable, this is the stepping stone to that next thing that's just going to get us that much further when it comes to medical science. So people are finally starting to take down their political shell when it comes to science becoming a politicized thing. And it just means that we're going to be that much closer to being able to see each other in person again. And that really, like, the frontier forward is that much more optimistic because we can start tackling other things.
Well, and defending in the future as well, because that's, if we learn nothing from 2020, it's that this shit happens.
Like that too.
My day job is actually cancer research, so I can confirm that there are people looking into using the technology that was developed as part of the push for the vaccine that they are hoping can be applicable to cancer research, or cancer treatment, rather.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I mean, I think the change in how we thought about, and it happened with, I feel like HIV was kind of the first push where this became a thing, where instead of curing it, managing it became the goal, and became a realistic goal. Managing didn't mean like palliative care. It meant, no, you get to still live your normal life for a normal lifespan. Instead of making this go away, we're just going to make it so that it doesn't impact your life. And working on medicines that could do that, as opposed to making it go away, completely changed, I think, how we even researched. I do feel like that changed how cancer was treated. Instead of looking for some kind of magic bullet, it was, how do we just make it so that people can live with cancer that much longer without, serious repercussions. So yeah, all this stuff just means that the next generation of medicines for whichever ailment are coming in from all these different angles instead of just this lateral cure it, kill it.
Science rules, man.
Yeah.
David, thank you so much. This has been a great talk. We didn't get to all of our questions, but that just means we have to drag you back in here. So
anytime.
Just say yes.
Yes.
All right, cool, man. Well, thank you so much, dude. I'm going to wave goodbye and hit end on the record.